Hello, and welcome to Write Volume's Asian American History More. Write Volume's goal is to give diverse voices an outlet for expression, which we have been doing through our anthology series. In order to celebrate Asian American history, we decided to give people an Asian American history present. Here's a quick intro to a writer you may not know, but maybe you should. Winnifred Eaton, also known as Onoto Watanna. Winnifred Eaton was born August 21st, 1875, in Montreal, Canada. She was the child of a Chinese mother, Grace A. Trefusis, Lotus Blossom, and an English father, Edward Eaton. She was the eighth child out of 14. Her sister, Edith Maude Eaton, born 1865 through 1914, was also a writer who published under a Chinese pseudonym, Sui Sin Far. You could check out the Celebrating Writing video we created about her, too. At the age of 20, Winnifred Eaton sold her first short story to Montreal's Metropolitan magazine, as well as several articles and stories in popular American magazines, including Ladies' Home Journal and Harper's Weekly. She reported and edited news features, along with writing poetry and short stories as she traveled. In 1896, she moved to Chicago. In 1901, she lived in New York. In 1901, she also married the American journalist Bertrand Babcock and had 4 kids together. He became abusive, so she divorced him in 1917 and then married Francis Reeve, an American businessman who wanted to ranch in the West. They moved to a small town 65 kilometers away from Calgary in Alberta, Canada. Not enjoying the ranch life so much, she rented a small house in Calgary where she wrote for the Albertan newspaper and a Calgary-based weekly called Farm and Ranch Review. She also became active in local theater and was instrumental in establishing the Calgary Little Theatre Association and was a founding member of the Calgary chapter of the Canadian Authors Association. She also took occasional trips to New York, where she wrote movie scenarios for Paramount and Universal Pictures. In 1921, she and Frank Reeve separated, so she moved to Los Angeles in 1925, and for the next 6 years, Eaton worked as a Hollywood screenwriter. She was involved in adapting to film such novels as Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera, for which she was not credited, and Edna Ferber's Showboat, and plays such as East is West by John Heimer and Samuel Shipman. In 1931, she and Frank Reeve reconciled, and she left Hollywood to return to Alberta with him. She died April 8, 1954, in Butte, Montana, of a heart attack while she was driving home to Calgary after a vacation in California. Even though Winnifred had never been to Japan, her knowledge of the country came from books, and her ancestry on her mother's side was Chinese. She wrote under the pseudonym Onoto Watanna, which had no actual meaning in Japanese. Her writing appealed to the American public's fascination with Japan and its culture. Eaton said she had chosen to write about Japanese characters and use a Japanese pseudonym to distinguish her work from that of her sister Edith, who was writing novels set in China under the name Sui Sin Far. Eaton would then even adopt the persona of Onoto Watanna, posing in kimonos for photographs, and told interviewers inconsistent stories of her ethnic background, stating at various times her father was Japanese or English, and her mother was Japanese or half Japanese and half Chinese. This pseudonym decision could also have been influenced by her awareness of the American prejudices against the Chinese and the perception in the West of Japanese culture as superior to that of China. She lived in the era of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was a United States federal law signed by President Arthur on May 6, 1882, suspending Chinese immigration for 10 years and declaring Chinese immigrants ineligible for naturalization, along with the Gary Act of 1892, which extended the Chinese immigration ban for an additional 10 years, while requiring Chinese residents to carry certificates of residences from the Internal Revenue Services or face hard labor and deportation. In December 1941, after the Japanese invasion of China, where almost 2,000 Canadian troops were sent to Hong Kong, expecting little more than guard duty, but ending up having to fight against the overwhelming power of an invading Japanese force, and then with the bombing of Pearl Harbor during the Second World War, Eaton expressed regret for having written about Japan. She also worried she had betrayed her Chinese heritage. Eaton wrote 16 novels and possibly more than 100 short stories and articles. Her writing included Japanese Love Story, which was published in Iroquois magazine in 1897, whose popularity led to the publication of several more Onoto Watanna stories in American magazines. In 1899, Miss Nume of Japan was published by Rand McNally. This is Eaton's first Onoto Watanna novel, and this groundbreaking story of interracial romance drew mixed reviews due to what was then a controversial issue. This makes her one of the first writers of Asian heritage to be published in North America. This writing style won the author an international readership for such later works as Japanese Nightingale of 1901, which later became a Broadway play and a motion picture, Wooing of Wisteria of 1902, The Heart of Hyacinth, published in 1903, A Japanese Blossom, published in 1906, and Tama, published in 1910. In 1917, after her divorce to her first husband, she anonymously published an autobiographical novel, Me, A Book of Remembrance. And in 1922, Sunny San was Eaton's last Japanese-themed novel. In 1924, she published Cattle, and in 1925, she published His Royal Nibs, which are novels set in Alberta, cattle country, and published respectively under the names Winnifred Eaton and Winnifred Eaton Reeve. The University of Calgary's Reeve Theatre is named in her honor. Here is an excerpt from Miss Nume of Japan, published in 1899. One day, Sachi said very seriously to his friend, "Omi, these strangers told us much of their strange land and talked of their fine schools there, where all manner of learning is taught. What say you that I do send my unworthy son Orito to this America so that he may see much of the world and also become a great scholar, and later return to crave thy noble daughter in marriage?" Omi was fairly delighted with this proposal, and the two friends talked and planned, and then sent for the lad. Orito was a youth of extreme beauty. He was tall and slender. His face was pale and oval, with features as fine and delicate as a girl's. His was not merely a beautiful face. There was something else in it, a certain impassive look that rendered it almost startling in its wonderful inscrutableness. It was not expressionless, but unreadable. The face of one with noble blood of the Kazoku and the samurai, pale, refined, and emotionless. He bowed low and courteously when he entered, and said a few words of gentle greeting to Omi, in a clear, mellow voice which was very pleasing. Sachi's eyes sparkled with pride as he looked on his son. Unlike Orito, he was a very impulsive man, and without preparing the boy, he hastened to tell him at once of their plans for his future. While his father was speaking, Orito's face did not alter from its calm, grave attention. Although he was unusually moved, he said only, "What of Nume, my father?" Sachi and Omi beamed at him. "When you return from this America, I will give you Nume as a bride," said Omi. "And when will that be?" asked Orito in a low voice. "In 8 years, my son, and you should have all manner of learning there, which cannot be acquired here in Tokyo or in Kyushu, and the manner of learning will be different from that taught anywhere in Japan. You will have a foreign education, as well as what you have learned here at home. It shall be thorough, and therefore it will take some years. You must prepare at once, my son. I desire it." Orito bowed gracefully and thanked his father, declaring it was his chief desire of his life to obey the will of his parent in all things. Now Nume was a very peculiar child. Unlike most Japanese maidens, she was impetuous and wayward. Her mother had died when she was born, and she had never had anyone to guide or direct her, so that she had grown up in a careless, happy fashion, worshipped by her father's servants, but depending entirely upon Orito for all of her small joys. Onoto was her only companion and friend, and she believed blindly in him. She told him all of her little troubles, and he in turn tried to teach her many things, for although their father had intended to betroth them to each other as soon as they were old enough, still Nume was only a girl of 10, whilst Onoto was a tall man youth of nearly 18 years. They loved each other dearly. Onoto loved Nume because she was one day to be his little wife and because she was very bright and pretty, whilst Nume loved big Onoto with pride that was pathetic in its confidence. That afternoon, Nume waited long for Onoto to come, but the boy had gone out across the valley and was wandering aimlessly among the hills, trying to make up his mind to go to Nume and tell her that in less than a week he must leave her and his beautiful home for 8 years. The next day, a great storm broke over the town, and Nume was unable to go to school, and because Onoto had not come, she became very restless and wandered fretfully around the house. So she complained bitterly to her father that Onoto had not come. Then Omi, forgetting all else save the great future in store for his prospective son-in-law, told her of the plans. And Nume listened to him, not as Onoto had done, with quiet, calm face, for hers was stormy and rebellious, and she sprang to her father's sides and caught his hands sharply in her little ones and crying out passionately, "No, no, my father, do not send Onoto away." Omi was shocked at this display of unmaidenly conduct and arose in a dignified fashion, ordering his daughter to leave him. And Nume crept out, too stunned to say more. About an hour after that, Onoto came in and discovered her rolled in a very forlorn little heap, with her head on a cushion and weeping her eyes out. "You should not weep, Nume," he said. "You should rather smile, for I see I will come back a great scholar, and will tell you all I have seen, the people I have met, the strange men and women." But at that, Nume pushed him from her and declared she wanted to hear not of those barbarians, and flashed her eyes wrathfully at him, whereat Onoto assured her that none of them would be half as beautiful or as sweet as his little Nume, his plum blossom, for the word Nume meant plum blossom in Japanese. Finally, Nume promised to be very brave, and the day Onoto left, she only wept when no one could see her. And as Onoto sailed for America and entered a great college called Harvard, and little Nume remained in Japan, and because there was no Onoto now to tell her thoughts to, she grew very subdued and quiet, so that few would have recognized in her the merry, wayward little girl who had followed Onoto around like a shadow. But Nume never forgot Onoto for one little moment, and when everyone else in the house was asleep, she would lie awake thinking of him. End of the excerpt. There begins the tale of love, romance, and obstacles. Eaton's description draws the reader in, along with the mystique of Japan and its people. Eaton includes the idea of the glory of America and its education and opportunities, too. So what will become of the young lovers? Will they really meet up again after 8 years, or will fate and opportunity tear them apart? You'll have to read it to discover what happens next. This has been a Write Volumes Asian American History More, and there are many more Asian American history presents if you look. Feel free to follow us, Write Volumes, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or sign up for our email list on our website, www.writevolumes.com. And if you have any writers that you think we should celebrate in our series, please leave a comment below. Thank you.